we'll get started on time because we were a nice packed agenda today, and I'm just going to be starting with a little bit of overview about the overall webinar series, as I have done for the last two. So I apologize for those of you who attended the previous ones and that this is a repeat information. Welcome to our webinar series on expanding ownership, shared equity and collaborative ownership for housing and agriculture. This is webinar 3 on cooperatives, LLCs, and other shared ownership. This webinar series is a collaborative effort between a number of different organizations, including the Green Mountain Economic Development Corporation, Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, Vital Communities, and the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law and Graduate School. So down the left-hand side of this slide, you can see the different organizers for different webinars in the series. I'm Sarah Danley. I'm just giving the overview for the overall series today, and then I'll be handing over to my colleagues, Sarah Wright and Alana Redden, who have been the organizers for the particular webinar tonight. I won't go into this in detail at this point in the webinar series, but in general, this shared equity and collaborative ownership series is looking at a whole range of different types of legal tools and models for shared ownership. I won't read all of these out, but essentially, our unofficial working definition is that we're looking at models where individual homeowners, landowners, and land stewards share ownership with each other or with the community in order to make it more affordable to have some ownership. Our goal in this webinar series is to think creatively about different ways that land use and land ownership could work in and for our community, not to imply that any one of these tools is right for all people or all communities. To gain inspiration and insight from great work happening in other states that we may never otherwise stumble across, while also recognizing that there are many excellent efforts happening in Vermont already. And it's not to imply that younger generations or marginalized communities should give up the opportunity for wealth building and settle for being renters forever, but rather to consider tools that can help more people build equity even when property ownership is not available. We do have a Jamboard for connecting between sessions. I'll send this link out after in the follow-up from the webinar. So this is a way to connect with people who've been attending different sessions than the ones you've been attending. Like I said, this is session 3 on cooperatives, LLCs, and other shared ownership. So how do the tools we're looking at tonight relate to the other tools that we're covering in this series? I'm going to take you really quickly through a whirlwind recap of the series so far to set the context. Here's my little diagram of standard individual, full, fee simple ownership. Individual people or households owning individual houses. So far in this series, we've been looking at cases where a community organization owns the property and leases it out, or where the community organization owns the land and the resident owns the home that sits on it. We've also talked about when a private corporation or even a private individual owns the land and the resident owns the home. I think of all of these as different ways of dividing property ownership. And this is a good moment for my disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer and nothing that I say is necessarily a legal definition, but more just a framework to set the context for tonight. So if those models that we've looked at previously are different ways of dividing property ownership, you can think of tonight's theme as owning property together. This could mean unrelated individuals owning a home or a farm together. Obviously, as a society, we're very comfortable with the individuals owning property together in a marital context, but it does not have to be between romantic partners or family members only. And owning property collectively could also mean multiple households owning multiple homes together, even if they don't live together. So the topic for tonight is looking at the legal tools and business structures that make this co-ownership possible. And with that, I will hand over to Sarah Wright to introduce our awesome slate of speakers.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Wright. I work as a senior planner at Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, and it's my honor to introduce 4 wonderful people who have agreed to share their time and their expertise with us this evening. And so I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we'll dive into some presentations by each of our panelists, and then we'll have a group Q&A at the end of today's webinar. So please hold your questions until the end. Our first speaker is Shane Rogers. Shane is a community organizer, wild food enthusiast, and a communications professional. He currently works as the communication director for Food Solutions New England, where he is working to build equitable and inclusive food systems that work for people through effective narrative building, collective action, and communications. And on his downtime, he can be found either outside or with a book. Our next speaker after Shane will be Sana Karadwin, who's based in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She serves as the Director of Finance and Operations for the Willow Permanent Real Estate Co-op. The Willow Permanent Real Estate Cooperative is a queer and trans BIPOC-led cooperative business committed to cultivating healing and liberation through community-centered real estate investment. Our third speaker will be Julia Curry, who's speaking on behalf of the Vermont Real Estate Cooperative. She's also on staff with the Cooperative Development Institute. Julia has advised and helped to form varieties of housing cooperatives since 2007. She loves using her social capital to help people build more autonomy and effective interdependence. And our final speaker will be Randy Amos, who's been an attorney in Burlington, Vermont since 1981, most recently as of counsel to the firm of Montreal, Edinger, and Barquist, PC, until his retirement from the practice of law in May 2022. Residential and commercial real estate closings represented a majority of his practice. He brings great depth of knowledge in group ownership of property, and he served on the board of directors for the Burlington Community Land Trust and its successor, the Champlain Housing Trust. So with that, I will pass it over to Shane.
Thanks, Sarah. Are we going to keep the slide up, or are we going to open it up without the screen share?
I can totally
works
end
for
it.
this one.
Yeah, let me stop the share if you prefer that. That makes sense.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. Thanks to Vital Communities and all the other partners. Like Sarah said, my name is Shane Rogers. I use he, him pronouns. I am coming to you today to speak a little bit about cooperative home ownership without a legal structure. So I'm going to detail a little bit how we got here, how I got here, and with that, I'll begin. So I guess first off, I just want to say that so often we hear that 30% of our income, the top 30% of our income should be going to housing. And I just want to put a plug in that is just a completely arbitrary number that was made up with the US National Housing Act of like 1937, and then arbitrarily updated in 1969 to 25%, and then arbitrarily updated again to 1981. And those numbers being used and thrown out for people just don't really take into account the debitization of our society. And the reason that I say this is because first and foremost, the only reason I was ever able to buy a house is because of the pause on student loan payments. That was the only possible way for me to save enough money to actually make a down payment. And if we are not reimagining the narrative for what homeownership looks like, I don't think we're going to be really getting there to help folks who are continuing to be left out of the process. So my partner and I, once we had some money saved, we started looking for houses. We did everything that you could imagine, right? Like we got a real estate agent. We started scouring Zillow and all the other websites. And I will tell you that the bank approved us for like $600,000 loan, which is asinine. So nevertheless, we did not at all try to look at houses that were $600,000, but every single house that we looked at that was within our price range was a hot mess. Things weren't done. I mean, you could just go through all the horror stories, and I feel like we experienced some side of it. Now, on the flip side, our friends, Emily and Julia, were also looking for a house, and their situation was a little bit more dire. They were getting kicked out of their apartment because their person was selling their apartment in the inflated market. So we thought, hey, why not just try to combine our two parties and see what we can do looking together? And I will tell you what, it was not hard at all. Nobody batted an eyelash at us going to the bank and saying, hey, we want to get pre-approved for 4 people. Our real estate agent just kind of chuckled and said, I guess we're doing 4 visits, like visits with 4 people. And our purchasing power increased exponentially, obviously, probably by like 2 if you look down at it. But the only people that probably had an issue with it were maybe our parents, who just have this kind of perverse idea that we were going to steal money from each other if we were to actually venture into this type of cooperative housing. But once again, as our theory kind of bore out and we were able to see nicer and nicer houses that would be able to accommodate us, the questions that we had to navigate also increased. We had to figure out, aside from 2 people, we had to work through 4 people. I wanted land. Julia wanted things like safe electrical outlets. Caroline wanted a place to be able to felt, and Emily wanted to make sure, that the heater worked. And we probably visited over 24 houses over the course of a year. And yet, even with combining our incomes at every house, the process was incredibly full of urgency and frankly, extremely anxiety inducing. And every time we came close to putting in an offer, which we did on over half a dozen houses, we were asked to waive inspections, pay in cash, and forego just about every consumer protection available to us to get an edge on the competition, as they said. We even got accepted on an offer, but because the appraisal of the house came back lower than what the actual asking price was, and we just didn't have $10,000 in cash lying around like people like us apparently do, the person who was selling it decided to put the house back on the market, where she got someone to buy it at the inflated price. But I will say that our persistence eventually paid off, and we found a beautiful house in Milton, Vermont. It is 2,700 square feet. It's from 1890 and sits on about 10 acres of land surrounded by a lot of beautiful area here. And I don't know if it was by just some alignment of the stars, or if one of us, I don't know, perhaps like threw the right coin into the right wishing well during the full moon, but the asking price wasn't inflated. The owners were motivated to sell, and we were only one of two folks that were looking to buy it. And I know that you're probably thinking, okay, so what went wrong with this? And nothing did. Now, mind you, we again are entered into this agreement as four of us entering into four consulting adults. So what went right was that we had four capable adults available to split all the deluge of tasks. We thought that the urgency of the process couldn't possibly get worse, and we were so wrong. But we were able to eliminate some of that because we were all working together. And this included literally everything from splitting inspections to reaching out to lawyers to navigating mortgage process. And it also helped us to keep a really clear and open line of communication between the four of us as we navigated this new venture. The bank, to their credit, really processed our mortgage without hesitation. And the only thing that they actually had a problem with is that their systems just weren't able to accommodate four names online. So they had to print out the mortgage application and fill it out by hand, which honestly is kind of funny if you think about having to be able to navigate that. And there were no technical barriers. Again, folks did not really bat an eyelash at the four of us agreeing to enter into this contract together. And, after purchasing the house and while moving and settling in, we really had to set out to figuring out how we were going to navigate co-ownership, because as it's noted, we are not in a legal structure. We didn't have terms of agreement, but we had to create them. We opened up a joint checking account to pay for all communal bills, including projects and repairs and groceries and utilities. We drafted and signed a very basic house contract that outlines what we'll do if somebody moves or dies, or if somebody loses their job and can't pay for their share of the house, and all those other contingencies that come up in life. And we set up bi-weekly house meetings where we check in on how we're feeling, what tasks need to be done, who is doing which chore, who is visiting, and really anything else that you can imagine. And then I think most importantly, we have agreed to function in this consent-based decision-making and task management model. We are giving folks in our house the trust to spearhead tasks in their own unique ways, and really breaking up all the work that goes with owning a house in manageable chunks among four folks. One of my favorite parts, though, is that we all cook for each other. Monday through Thursday, one of us takes a day of the week, and we cook a meal for the house where we, depending on our schedule, sit down, we converse, and we have ourselves a good time of just unwinding after what is usually a hectic day, these past 3 months, especially for us. And of course, as I get to the end here, things don't always run smoothly. We have our interpersonal issues, as everybody does. We get tired, we get sick, but we're constantly working on being in better communication. assuming the best intent and really learning to navigate what is, I can imagine, and I don't know why, but it's kind of a unique situation. But overall, I would say that any headaches are far outweighed by the positives of co-living. And that definitely includes the financial positives. Because we live together, our mortgage, our taxes, our utilities, and our repair and project funds are all split 4 ways. Just to kind of give you a quick breakdown, we bought a house for $430,000. We did a 5% down payment for $21,000, or only $5,375 each. This led us to taking out a $408,000 loan with a 3% mortgage rate. For this, the mortgage comes out to $1,700 a month for each, $1,700 a month total. With escrow, it comes out to about $2,700 a month total. We pay about $650 in utility bills, internet, trash, etc. And we sock away about $1,000 a month for project and repair funds, just to make sure that we can address anything that comes up. And that overall, everybody is paying a base pay of about $1,100 a month each month, which is a little bit more than what I was paying in rent, but a lot less than I have folks that are paying in rent as well. And then we get to enjoy, again, 10 acres, a beautiful area and a beautiful house, where we are able to build that equity in a system that is set up to function off the trading of equity. And I will say the last thing I'll say before I wrap up is that we got extremely lucky. And I wouldn't change our situation. I really enjoy this adventure that we're on over the past year. But the fact that housing is so perversely subjected really to the whims of the markets and speculators and those with money is kind of a sad commentary on where we are in society. And I know that's why you're all here. And while our situation is certainly something that I would encourage others to explore, and we just had a friend who did this to purchase a house in Burlington with their extended friends and family. I will say I don't know if this would have been possible to do this during this current inflation reduction measure time that are driving up interest rates. If we would have bought a house right now, our interest rates would have put us at $1,000 or more a month in mortgage payments than what we're currently paying. So for folks who are trying to access housing, co-ownership, I would highly recommend it enough, but we know it's not the only solution and can't be the only solution to the problem in a situation that's just entirely broken. We need to make sure that folks who are traditionally subjected to marginalization and who are left out of these process can actually access these things that are necessary to our lives. And with that, I'll check, and I look forward to talking with you all during the Q&A.
Thank you, Shane. Okay, we'll pass it over to Sana Caradwin from the Willow Permanent Real Estate Co-op.
Thank you. Yes, I am Sana Caradwin, and my partners are Trenda and Cachet. Trenda is our founder. Next slide. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what a permanent real estate cooperative is, but the Sustainable Economies Law Center describes it as a movement cooperative designed to provide housing, build a large membership base, and serve members' collective goal to transform our neighborhoods and our system of finance and land ownership. The basic idea is that the community owns the land and the homes that we're renting and working in. Right now, our personal focus is on personal property, housing, but we hope to do commercial properties as well, so that we'll also be owning the land in which we work in. We are setting up as a multi-stakeholder cooperative, allowing for multi-tiers of ownership and community control. So we will have worker owners, we will have leasee owners, the people who are leasing and living in the house, and then we'll also have community owners and investors. And our intention is to permanently remove land and homes from the speculative market, so that we're not planning to like buy and sell. We're planning to just buy up as much land and all of the land, hopefully eventually, so that the community is then able to control the rates the rates of what our rents are, what we're paying for the land, and kind of what happens within it. So building collective power. Next slide, please. So how do we operate? How does this work? Our member owners collectively support through the purchase of shares, offering monthly contribution, annual dues, and through collective decision making. So we are run by a board of directors, which is elected and comprised of each membership category. So there will be leasing owners on the board, worker owners, and community members. The staff owners are going to provide the logistical support, the technical support, resource connection, and community building opportunities for our members. All deeds to all of the properties are held by the cooperative. They're not individually owned, so nobody is individually at risk, and no one is individually responsible for repairing their home. So if your roof goes, you don't have to come up with the $40,000. I actually don't know how much it is to repair a roof these days, but I'm guessing it's a lot of money. You don't have to come up with it on your own. The cooperative is there to help you. And each lease will be customized depending on where the location is and what the agreement is with the leasee who will be living there. Next slide, please. So we are currently just began year 3, and our process began with just visioning. Our founder, Trenda, found themselves in a situation where they didn't have secure housing entering the pandemic. And it's a very scary place to be. And we noticed that a lot of people in our community were kind of in a similar place. And that, like, when our community was struggling, the people who owned the properties were disconnected from that problem. And so we knew, one, immediately we needed housing, and 2, we wanted to control what this looked like in the future. So we thought about what our ideals were, what we could hope for, what we could want, and then what was around us. We looked into other models, housing co-ops, resident-owned communities, community land trusts, and all different kinds of structures. We got connected with the Community Cooperative Development Institute in Andrew, and the Suffolk University Law Clinic, and they really helped us. All of these models, we put together kind of what was possible with what was out there already and what we wanted ours to look like. And then we began spreading the word and seeing who was interested and who was maybe thinking along the same lines, and started to fundraising to see what we could do and how we could make this happen. And we were very lucky to have some really, really passionate early investors. And then we continued asking questions. Next slide. And last year was huge. We decided that a PREC was what we wanted to do. We are going to incorporate as a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We decided we did not want to be nonprofit. We began to develop our bylaws and our articles of incorporation. We discussed what the different shares would look like, what investments would be, and the possibility of member dues. We started talking about our business plan, the overall model, and breaking out into chunks what was possible here and now and what we wanted to do in the future. We hope to have co-ops on co-ops on co-ops and have the community owning everything that impacts our daily lives. And then we started learning how to talk about it, because this is a new thing. We do have EB PREC, and Vermont is doing a PREC as well, but it's still a fairly new model. So learning how to talk about it, talking to people who are doing it, developing our logo and our website, swag. We got sweatshirts last year. We got a fiscal sponsorship so that we could take in donations. And that was really, really important. That helped more money. We also closed on our very first property, which is a food forest in Holyoke. It has 300 different species of edibles on the land and 2 apartments, and we have our first leases in there. So last year was a very, very big year. We're continuing to build connections, and we haven't actually incorporated. So now we're at the beginning of year 3. Next slide. And in this year, I think actually, hopefully, fingers crossed, tomorrow, we're going to incorporate as a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We finally finalized our bylaws, and if it doesn't come back, if the state doesn't reject it, will be a go for February 1st, which is really great because it's the beginning of Black History Month. And we're looking forward to that. There's still so much to develop. We still have to finalize our financial system. What does it look like when the money goes on, comes in, rents, and from all of the different avenues that we'll be collecting funds? What does it look like? Where does it go? And how is everyone protected? And we're hoping, there's 3 of us working very, very part-time right now. But we're hoping to be able to raise enough money in this year so that by the end of the year, we can all be working full-time. There's definitely enough work. And that's where we are now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sana. At this point, we will turn it over to Julia Curry of the Vermont Real Estate Cooperative and the Cooperative Development Institute.
Great, thank you. What a great panel. It's fun to be here with Sana from Willow Prac, because Vermont Real Estate Co-op is also a prac, but one that developed in a somewhat different way. But I did want to first just take a step back and make sure sort of the fundamental notions about cooperatives are clear. I think that, the first thing that's coming clear from this panel is a cooperative can be a formal, the structure of a formal corporation. And in Vermont, that is made easier by the fact that we have an enabling state statute that defines housing cooperatives. Not a lot of states don't have that. So it becomes less of a feasible option maybe. But also, as we heard from Shane, right, you can be a cooperative informally. So you can incorporate or you could not incorporate in their case. To me, two things are distinctive about being a cooperative. If you incorporate formally as a cooperative, then the structure is that, you're forming a business that's cooperatively owned. So the business owns the property and the members own the business. So just as Sana said, the members of a co-op don't directly individually own the real estate in that case of formal incorporation. The other thing that is really, I think, kind of the spiritual core of cooperatives is the values and principles that people are adopting when they choose to form a co-op. So if we could go to the next slide for that. So this is the 7 cooperative principles that are promulgated by the International Cooperative Alliance. Not every cooperative necessarily formally adopts them, but this is kind of the DNA, I guess, of contemporary cooperatives. The democratic member control, I would say, is one of the strongest elements and one of the things that people care the most about when they form cooperatives, as well as the autonomy and independence. The members' economic participation, I guess, in my mind, sort of goes without saying, right? You do this when there's something, when there are resources involved, when there are resources at stake. Education, training, and information comes about, I think, whether you planned it or not, because when you're doing a housing co-op of any variety, there's a lot to learn, right? There's a lot of kind of information to learn, and also the communication skills and collaboration skills are a huge element. And I think you can kind of never get to the bottom of that. That's one of the things, that's one of the reasons that I work with cooperatives, because that's I value that so much. And some people are drawn to co-ops in that way because they're looking for a space where they can kind of become more collaborative and build these interdependent relationships. And for other people, that's kind of a byproduct. They might be looking, interested in a much more pragmatic way, and then realize, oh, we kind of have to up our game in order to work together in this situation. Cooperation among cooperatives is a goal. I think sometimes co-ops, the people running co-ops may feel kind of strapped for time and energy. So, because we're all in this culture where everything feels scarce, the capacity to connect may feel scarce too. But it's really energizing when it happens. And then concern for community is probably the other core value that I think brings a lot of people to the cooperative structure. If we could go to the next slide. So this is a chart that I'm not going to dwell on, but I found helpful for just breaking out all the different dimensions of property ownership, and why people might choose co-ops or some other type of entity. But it's really who owns the land, who owns the properties, and this was all recapped with regard to the prior webinars. Who's making the fiscal decisions? Who's setting the budget? And then that drives, what are the costs, either of rent or paying off the mortgage? What is the financial investment of each household or individual that's participating? Do the residents commit to any shared values? Are there shared activities? Is it some type of intentional community? Is the group prioritizing affordability or the building of household wealth? Because those are, pretty much in tension, at least in the short term and often in the long term. And then who can live there? And with the asterisk that, all of this housing is fair housing laws apply, right? Particularly if it's if it's not the situation that Shane's in, right, which is informal co-ownership, but any type of business entity that's providing housing in any way does have to be following fair housing laws. Above and beyond that, co-ops can, can say they're for a smaller demographic as long as it's not violating those laws. So one of the co-ops that I used to work with was designated for working artists, for instance. So this is a chart that I think the group is going to make available to folks, probably by email or on the website. But a couple of things that I wanted to highlight here is the distinction between housing cooperatives and, say, a homeowner association, like, condo association. There's a big financial distinction in that the people in a condo association or HOA, are buying their unit, and they have to be able to pull together the money to do that individually. In addition, there's a big values distinction. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories of people in HOAs where they run their association together because they have to, but there are really no shared values and no, or not necessarily shared values and not necessarily a sense of mutual accountability or accountability to the rules of the association. So that's a big distinction I've seen. But the other thing I wanted to pull out here is the distinction between a housing co-op and a permanent real estate co-op, right? So in the case of the Vermont Real Estate Co-op, we formed in the first instance to buy a commercial property. We're now looking at getting into housing, but the relationship that we're picturing is essentially a landlord-tenant relationship. I don't think that we want to, we haven't made this as a final decision yet, but the way that people are thinking about it, we're looking at probably buying property in Burlington, and I think the sense of the group is we wouldn't want to require tenants to have to join the cooperative in order to rent, to rent from VREC. So that's, kind of a wrinkle where the cooperative level is the level of community members owning the properties. And the point is essentially to keep local control of those properties, be a better landlord than a lot of the really extremely exploitive landlords that we see here in the community. And over the long term, be able to make that housing affordable compared to how this market, how the market grows more and more expensive for renters. So maybe we could go to the next slide. So that's how we are envisioning using this permanent real estate co-op model. And as I said, we're still kind of exploring how we want to do that. So just to back it up a minute, the way that we came together was that there's a property in town that another co-op, a brewery co-op, was looking at. So this brewery co-op hopes to open a brew pub, and they started scouting out possible locations. And apparently you need a really strong, you need an extremely strong structure. So the options were very few. They identified this one property, and it was owned by someone who is friendly to cooperatives. And so they approached him to talk about buying it. And in those conversations, the brew co-op realized that it would really be biting off more than they could chew, to both be growing their business and then own a property. And so some of those folks, kind of decided that the PREC model could be the way to have that own that property. And there were enough people who were willing to invest in Vermont Real Estate Co-op to make that happen. So we formed the cooperative. We have some pretty basic bylaws. We went ahead and bought the property. So in our case, owning that, was a fairly early step, and we are now still very much in the stage of developing other policies, looking at, developing the business model, doing a lot of educating ourselves and exploring around becoming owners of multifamily properties. So what else did I want to say about that? I think we, like Willow, our goal is to take properties out of the speculative market. We also see our structure as a way for members of the community to invest in property without having to be rich. So it's certainly going to be people who have, disposable income. The shares cost $1,000 currently, and we're talking about revamping that or finding a way to make it, if in the future, if people who are renting apartments from us wanted to become members, we would want to make that more accessible than it currently is. But that's what worked for this initial phase. So it's people who can afford to put $1,000 into this venture. We have been paying some pretty modest dividends, and the state law caps dividends at 6% a year. So it's certainly not for anyone who's looking to get the maximum financial return on their money. It is for people who want to support this kind of community ownership, but also make a bit back. I think that matters to some people, and to some people it doesn't matter. And then it's a way for us to manage properties, in accord with the values and goals of the membership. And that's probably going to be a lively, ongoing conversation with different priorities. For some people like myself, it's really, how do we, it's sort of, it feels like a bit satirical to say, how do we keep it affordable? Because nothing is affordable in the housing market in Burlington. But it's really, how do we keep it as affordable as we can while maintaining the buildings? I think other people are very interested in, energy efficiency, maybe, seeing how far they can go toward net zero with any structures. Some people are interested in growing vegetables on the land. So there are different interests of that sort that I think we would have to, we'll be spending time just figuring out how much of them can we do and where do we have to make trade-offs. And then the challenges, that we're seeing, one is just understanding real estate as a business. There's just a lot to learn around that. And then to get into housing, there's even much more to learn. So I think this is an area where people don't necessarily know what they don't know. So it's just really important for an entity like ours to do a lot of research in an ongoing way and be, inviting our members and other folks to talk to us, to look at our procedures, to let us know where they see weaknesses, and that kind of thing. So it's definitely a labor of love, right? And for people who really have the time and interest to learn and share this information. We have found that it's been pretty easy so far to have people join, but our next likely step is we'll probably be looking for a friendly seller of an apartment building, and that might be a lot harder to find, but we won't know until we try it. So that's where we're headed. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julia. At this point, we're going to pass it over to Randy Amos. Sarah, could you take the slides down for us? Thank you. Take it away, Randy.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. Very interesting discussion, and I'm probably the least aware of what this group has been doing out of all of us. So it's been a learning thing for me. One of the things that I wanted to do, my focus is going to be on LLCs as a form of ownership. And I don't know what different levels of understanding of all of that are, but there's a bit of panache about having an LLC as opposed to a corporation, or a partnership. But frankly, it's all about shaving the liability and obligations in different ways. And historically, corporations were literally a charter from the crown initially, and then the government to do a specific thing for a specific amount of time. And then people started realizing that, well, it was kind of a clunky thing. It was hard to get some things done. It was hard to do it without interference from that granting entity, whether the king or the government. And so all different ways of doing business were explored. And the most basic one, and I think this is, without knowing anything more about what Shane's involved in than what he was telling us today, he's got a very basic partnership, which in Vermont and most states, all it takes is an oral agreement. And you can go from there. Now, if you have a real estate involved in a partnership, everybody needs to own the property together in order to make sure that everybody's protected for those things that only lawyers think of as bad things to happen. And so he's got a partnership agreement, it appears, and he's sorted out the things that lawyers would worry about. Buy, sell, in case everybody's just done with the deal, how do we get out of it? What happens if somebody dies? What happens if somebody wants to move? And all of those things are issues that can come up in any relationship that has any hint of being a commercial or a non-emotional relationship. And so, the caveat is, can you come up with a set of principles and a set of rules and a set of understandings that cover the bases that you need to cover, but that are also enforceable and that are written in a way so that a stranger to the situation would be able to understand them. And that stranger, unfortunately, would most likely be a judge if everything went south and everybody went to their corners and put on the gloves. And so, that part is very important. And I guess I'm going to put a plug in for all the professionals that are involved in organizations like this, the accountants, the lawyers, maybe financial planners even. There are a lot of sources of information that can be useful in these situations. The benefit that came from LLCs over time, you have the clunky corporation, you have the sort of I don't know, it's sort of partnerships being sort of whatever you want them to be, they are, but they're also very informal. And then LLCs came along, limited liability corporations, companies, and what they were trying to do is mash together the best parts of corporations and the best parts of partnerships, really. And the cool thing about an LLC is that you can make it into your own image. You can decide whose contributions and how much. You can decide weighted voting depending on that initial investment. You can decide on having a manager so that some members don't have a lot to do and one member has a lot to do to run things. And all of this is put together in a operating agreement that everybody agrees to. And one of the main importances or important things about an operating agreement is that it makes anybody who is going to own an interest in the LLC to agree to whatever the operating agreement is. What that usually means is that when you have two people, you have an operating agreement. When a third person comes along, if you want them to join you, you do a new operating agreement that balances all three interests out the way that you want it. And then you would, you can have, if you're talking about home ownership, you can have the right to live there, be part of what the LLC is doing. If you're doing a commercial transaction, your business could be allotted a certain amount, and you could do it that way. You could also, if it suited you, instead of trying to figure all that out ahead of time, is simply lease the portion of the property owned by an LLC to each of the members to do whatever the heck they wanted to, and it wouldn't have to be all of them. So you get that cooperative sort of financing from the outside in, but you also get the flexibility of who gets to use what. And so it can be very creative in terms of how you put things together and what the rights and responsibilities are amongst the owners. You do have a backdrop of state law to help you with certain things. All the members are entitled to all the financials, for instance, and there are certain rules in certain circumstances about who must have a vote to do something and that kind of thing. There are no officers, so there's no president, vice president, treasurer, or secretary, but you can assign responsibilities to people to do those things just as easily as you could in a partnership, for instance. And so it does offer a lot of flexibility. It doesn't necessarily, referring back to Julia's slide on the certain things that are with each entity, it's going to be looking more like a HOA perhaps than it would be a cooperative thing, in terms of not having a shared vision or not needing to in order to have an LLC. An LLC, though, once you thrash about all the issues that you have in the operating agreement, you darn well better have some shared vision, else it's all going to just sink. But it's not a requirement. And it's, the kind of shared vision that you could have could be commercial, it could be residential, it could be a values-based thing if you wanted it to be. The problem that you might have with an LLC for home ownership, so for instance, Shane may not find it to be very useful because if an LLC owns the property, there might be some trouble getting some of the tax benefits for property tax ownership, for instance, in Vermont, we have the education tax rebate that makes a portion of our property taxes income sensitive. That may be hard to shuffle through. And then there are also some estate planning issues that you can do with sole ownership that can be harder to do with entity ownership, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. And those are things like things called like enhanced life estate deed to pass property on to family members on your death without having to go through probate. In an LLC situation, everybody who owns an interest in that LLC owns that as personal property. And so when they die, the LLC operating agreement is probably going to spell out what the estate is going to get and how they're going to get it. And if you negotiate that well, the LLC will be required to buy that interest from the estate. And the estate is happy about that part, but may not be happy about the fact that the people in the LLC are going to set the terms of that sale. And it can be done in terms of how to value it. It can be done in terms of how to pay for it over time, and basically force people to accept payments over time that they otherwise would be able to get immediately or on a shorter term. So, it brings in a lot of different elements. One thing I do think that you need to do if you want to do an LLC and an operating agreement, we all love and hate the internet. Lawyers hate the internet a little more than most because there are copies of agreements out there that we have no idea where they come from. We have no idea which state law that they are hoping to satisfy. And so things like that can be problematic. If you are going to do an LLC, it looks like it's easy because you can go on the Secretary of State's website, at least in Vermont, and for what is it, $50 or something, you can get an LLC. But the state statute says in order to have an LLC, you have to have an operating agreement, and there's no operating agreement on the website. So you can think you have something, but you don't have it completely. And that makes a difference in terms of things like potential liability for debt or tortious liability, a slip and fall type of situation, which is a big issue in real estate, unfortunately. So, I just would caution people that want to look at that route to be careful about it, be intentional about it, have good professionals behind you, be an informed client. Those are the best kinds. Don't be one of my least favorite kinds, which are the ones that walk in and say, just take care of this for me and send me a bill, because then I never really know what they want. And it's almost never going to be a situation that I'm going to be able to satisfy them or I'll be able to. And so, being informed, being intentional, being careful, and understanding, which way you want liabilities and responsibilities to go, and talk that through. And, in addition to the professional advice you might get from an accountant or lawyer, if you're doing a group like Shane does, I don't know, maybe group therapy might not be a bad idea, just to be sure that you guys are all on the same page. Have somebody there to ask the hard questions. And, everybody starts out being adults, but not always lucky enough to have it stay that way in any kind of interpersonal relationships with human beings. And as you can imagine, I always see the bad stuff. So that's or I have in the past, and that's where that comes from. I don't mean to say that we shouldn't have some faith in our fellow humans, that we can all get along and do just fine, but somehow it doesn't always work out that way. All right, so I want to leave enough time for questions and answers. I see a lot of people are popping up in the chats and questions, and be happy to stick around and answer a few.
Great. Thank you so much, Randy.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, there's some great discussion happening in the chat right now. John raised some questions about what happens with co-ownership under certain situations where difficulties are encountered. I do want to flag a question from Fran Miller for Sauna, which is, how did you all decide a PREC was the right thing for you? Was there some benefit it provided that was better for you than other forms, such as a community land trust? And what entity owns the Holyoke property now? So that question was for Sauna, and if others want to chime in on that as well. And if you have questions, do also raise your hand.
We haven't completely ruled out having some of our properties in a community land trust, but overall, incorporating as a multi-stakeholder corporation gives us the most flexibility. We didn't want to be not-for-profit because we wanted to be able to build equity and power for our owners and in the community. Right now, we have an LLC that is owned by a couple of our members. Well, not members yet, but two of the founding people, and that the Willow Prec LLC will be owned ultimately by Willow Prec Corporation, the multi-stakeholder corporation. And we're determining whether individual properties are going to be held by land trusts or different LLCs, mostly to figure out, what provides the most benefit for the stewards of the land and for the corporation or the cooperative as a whole. Does that answer the question?
Wonderful, thank you. Other questions, please feel free to raise your hand. You can use the raise hand function under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. Shane's been putting some fantastic information into the chat in response to questions from John. Thank you, Shane. I also see another question here from Fran for both Sana and Julia. Do investors get their money back if they want it? Is there a time frame that they've invested for, like a CD, and then they can re-up?
We are still working out the details, but yes, the investor should, if it's not going to sink us, be able to pull their money out, their original investment out with some interest. There isn't a specific time frame now. We're still working some of those details out, and that's in our next phase after we incorporate, coming up with what those legal agreements will look like for each of the membership categories.
And for us, currently, our documents just say that, that the timing of the refund of shares is at the board's discretion. We have had a few folks who told us they needed to withdraw their money, and we were able to do it right away. But if we were, in a purchase process where every dollar was scarce, we wanted that flexibility to be able to say, we can't do this yet. So that's our approach for now.
Thank you. I see another question here from Allison. What happens if an LLC wants to transfer to a different state? Randy, would you be able to take that one?
Yes, the LLCs are state confined, I guess. So if an LLC owns property in Vermont, it's a Vermont LLC. Generally, you can have a foreign LLC buy property in another state, but I think there's usually a registration process that you have to go through. So if you have real estate in Vermont and you're a Vermont LLC and you want to go buy real estate in another state, your choices would be to operate as a foreign LLC in that other state, or create a LLC in that state and own the property. You could have the same basic operating agreement amongst the same people and do it that way. But it does start to get a little bit complicated.
Wonderful, thank you. We're now at 3:30, or excuse me, 6:30. It's been a long day. And so I want to respect everybody's time. I just want to say a huge thank you to all four of our panelists. You brought a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience to us this evening. We really appreciate you sharing your time. Sarah, did you have any closing comments you wanted to make?
Nope, I had other slides, but I just put it in the chat with the reminder for registering for the one last webinar in the series, and then also the digital bulletin board to connect with each other. That's
Wonderful.
all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.
Thanks.